Well, the Labor Party re-entered our parliament today with an overwhelming majority in the House of Representatives and with perhaps greater ambition than it even took to the election. It's clear it will quickly seek legislation for key election pledges, including small personal tax cuts, protecting penalty rates, paying off 20% of student debt, childcare subsidies, more medicines on the pharmaceuticals benefit scheme, and 18 million extra doctors' visits to be bulk billed. On its list, its controversial measure to impose capital gains tax on unrealised gains for those with more than $3 million in their superannuation fund. But the government does have challenges, not the least Australia's anaemic economic growth. Then, with all these measures, there's increased spending, ballooning budget deficits, and with that, mounting government debt. The Albanese government is talking up its economic credentials. The big question is whether it can deliver its social reforms and yet still repair the budget bottom line. Chris Richardson is one of Australia's leading independent economists who watches budgets and spending perhaps more closely than most, and he joins me now. Chris, always good to chat to you. I set out the government's agenda for this parliament, but given the fact its majority is now so big, so large, a record in the House of Representatives, the question is whether its ambitions are bigger than its election mandate.
I would love to see the government being ambitious, and it needs to be more ambitious than its mandate. Neither side of politics took anything terribly ambitious to the election for Australians, despite the fact that our living standards are essentially the same today as they were a decade ago, despite the fact that the challenges continue to grow around the world. So I'd love to see ambition. The government, to its credit, has that summit coming in a month. But make or break will be just how hard it pushes. Second-term government, huge majority. If Australia can't get stuff done under current circumstances, what can we do?
OK, but then the big issue that I would argue is that business has seen that during the first term of the Albanese government, the emphasis was very much on the social outcomes rather than necessarily the business and investment outcomes. Right now, Australia does have a productivity crisis, but also a crisis in its competitiveness. It is not competitive with overseas countries, and so capital is leaving this country. The big question is whether this government is prepared to basically alienate some parts of its constituency to make Australia more competitive.
Yeah, and that is the key challenge for leadership, and to be fair, for Australia in general, not just the politicians, not just the government. Australians, as an electorate, we haven't been terribly forgiving of politicians who do challenge us. Think of John Hewson a third of a century ago, or Bill Shorten, 2019, or for that matter, not so much opposition seeking government, but when Tony Abbott won government and then tried to be ambitious around things that needed to change, we weren't that forgiving there either. So you laid this out, right? The government is starting to be more ambitious than its election program. That carries political risks, but so it should. The politicians and the public need to rise to the challenges of the moment. We are not doing well enough.
OK, then there's another question here, is whether the government can have a more ambitious agenda to make Australia more competitive without spending money. Because right now it seems that the government is very good at spending money and therefore racking up debts. And it's been blessed by the fact that it's had near record unemployment rates, which means PAYG taxpayers have been just hoovering more and more money into the government's coffers, producing its surpluses.
Yeah, lots of band-aids would be the summary of recent years. The fight against inflation generated a bunch of pain on our living standards. Wages didn't keep up with prices. The tax take took a bigger chunk out of our pockets. And so obviously did interest rates. And that combination drove our living standards down in the last handful of years. In response to that, not just the feds, but the states turned on the taps and handed out money. But our living standards are starting to grow again. And we've got to go from Band-Aid to better than Band-Aid to a laser-like focus on making Australians more productive. If we want to be more prosperous, and we should, we've been spinning our wheels for a decade, then the government has to have a focus on seeing Australia more efficient. And some of the changes necessary there would make some people grumpy along the way.
But everything that I see right now is that the solution appears to be higher taxes, not lower taxes, for corporates to be able to make them more competitive, to be able to try and bring down energy prices, because the transition to renewable energies is clearly costing more. None of these things are actually helping Australia be more competitive and to attract more capital into this country.
Or in other words, you are saying that we have no-go areas, that there are areas where people say, oh, it's much too hard, or the politics is too toxic, and therefore we're not going to touch it. I guess that is a not unreasonable summary of the last 20 years. Both sides of politics have been guilty of demonising things that needed to be done. You see it in tax, you see it in regulation, you see it in federal-state relations. You see it in a bunch of areas where Australia is doing many dumb things and should change. But the willingness to take that on, there seems to be some hints that the government will back compromise that comes out of big business, big unions, the social sector with ACOS. And that's great. I mean, that's something. But if we are limited to the compromises that can be reached among those big groups, is that enough in the face of, the fails of the last decade? On average, living standards in the rich countries of the world over the last decade rose 22%. In Australia, they rose 1.5%. We have to do better.
I'll tell you what, it's going to be fascinating just to watch exactly how they tackle this and whether they are prepared to take on some of their natural allies, which in the past, the Hawke-Keating government was very much politically prepared to do. Chris Richardson, we'll watch it with interest. Of course, they're back with Question Time tomorrow. Many thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ross.